This is a story when I was in 11th grade. For the first time, I fell in love during the summer of my sophomore year of high school. Just thinking about Emily made my heart race. Why did I fall in love with her? It was because I had been bullied since the beginning of my sophomore year in high school. One day, I was bullied as usual. Graffiti covered my desk. My jacket was hidden. My textbook was stolen, and my desk was turned upside down. Do you realize how annoying you are? The leader of the bullies told me every day. That day, after school, I stayed alone in the classroom until the end of the day to clean up the graffiti on my desk. I was so used to removing graffiti from these desks that I could do it in 10 minutes. I had acquired such useless skills. When I finished erasing the graffiti on the desk, "What is the meaning of my life?" I mumbled to myself. I was so depressed that I sat alone in my chair and cried. It was an after-school classroom. I was sobbing since no one could see me. Then, I heard a voice in my ear. "Why are you crying?" A girl spoke to me. I was so taken aback that I immediately stopped crying and turned to see the source of the voice. Emily was standing there. Emily was a popular girl in my class. I had to ask, "Huh? What?" I asked, "Why are you crying?" No, I'm not crying." "You're sobbing. It's impossible to disguise." "No, I just got a little dust in my eye." While we were having a pointless discussion, she quietly approached me and abruptly patted me on the back. "Pull yourself together. Tears don't suit you. Come on, smile. You look cooler when you smile. I like it when you smile." With a lovely smile, she said. So I smiled at her and showed her my face. "You're not smiling at all." She looked at my face and laughed hard. Seeing her laughing face, I laughed a little too. "I'm referring to that expression. With that smile on your face, you seem cooler," she said to me. I'd forgotten how to laugh because I hadn't done so in a long time, but she reminded me. So, "Thanks," I told her. "You're welcome," Emily replied. From that day on, I always smiled, even when I was bullied. Emily told me to smile, and I swore I'd never cry again. So I stopped crying. "Why are you laughing while being bullied? You're disgusting." With that, I was bullied even more, but I still smiled. Gradually, the bullying stopped, and I found myself making many friends. I'm sure that the bullies found it uninteresting to bully me because they saw me laughing and not being miserable after being bullied. But it was Emily's comments that ultimately saved me from the bullies. I owed her so much appreciation that I believed I'd never be able to repay her. Since that day, I've had feelings for Emily, and before I realized it, it was time to graduate from high school. During that time, I tried many times to confess my feelings to her, but I couldn't do it because I loved her, and I loved her too much, and I was frightened of losing her. I was afraid that if I declared my feelings and she rejected me, things would get awkward and our existing relationship would fall apart. I was too timid to confess my feelings. But there was no denying that we had grown considerably closer as friends since that day. One day, Emily and I were having a little chat in the classroom after school. We talked about exams, our current situations, and various other things. As we were talking about such things, "Is there anyone you like?" I was so surprised that I was at a loss for words. I was startled when the person I loved inquired about it, but I didn't want her to find out. "How about you, Emily?" I tried to cover it up by asking her back. How pathetic. It was the ideal opportunity for me to express my feelings to her. But I didn't dare to do so, and instead answered with a question. What was her answer? "I have a crush on someone." That was her answer. Okay, so she loves someone, I thought to myself. I was shocked, since if she was talking about it to me, the person she likes couldn't be me. As we talked, I realized that it was time to leave school. "Shall we go home?" With that, we grabbed our stuff and left the school. We'd gone home with each other a few times since that day, but I couldn't get used to walking with her. I was thinking about how unsettling it was for me to walk home with Emily. As I was thinking that, "You didn't answer me back there, but is there anyone you like?" She suddenly brought it up again. I thought we had already discussed this earlier, but since she had already answered my question, I felt obligated to respond. She likes someone else. Therefore, I chose to answer honestly. "I do have feelings for someone," I answered. She then appeared to have a sad expression for a brief while before smiling. "I see. So you like someone, huh? Good luck with that," she said to me. I was worried about her sad expression, but I assumed it was just my imagination. "Thanks, I wish us both luck," I told her. And then we came to a place where we had to say goodbye. "See ya! See you tomorrow!" We said goodbye to each other, but the number of times I've chatted with her has dropped considerably since we walked home together that day. Days went on like that, and before I knew it, we were about to graduate. So I eventually decided to tell Emily about my feelings on the day of our graduation ceremony. To be honest, I knew what the outcome would be. She is in love with someone. I knew the odds of my love succeeding were nil. But even so, I could not give up on this feeling. I couldn't let go of this sensation. I didn't want to lose up on this first love feeling. I decided to give it a shot. Then, in the morning, 1 month before the graduation ceremony, I hadn't talked to Emily much since that day, but we still exchanged greetings every day. I looked around the classroom, expecting to see her, but she was nowhere to be seen. Emily always came to school early and had never arrived later than me. I was depressed, since I assumed she had the day off because of the upcoming entrance exam. I assumed she had been studying late at night for her entrance exams, and I had overslept by mistake. Finally, the bell rang, and our teacher, Miss Brown, entered. She didn't, however, appear to be her typical self. Even the principal came in with her. One of the students was confused as to why she entered the classroom with a melancholy expression on her face, as well as why the principal, who was not meant to be there, also entered. "What happened, Miss Brown?" he asked Miss Brown. Then Miss Brown told us. "Emily was hit by a car on her way home from school yesterday, becoming unconscious and passing away at the hospital this morning," the principal also said. "We teachers are also taken aback by the incident's suddenness. I understand that some of you were surprised to hear this, so please come to the counseling office if you have any questions." The principal left after placing a flower on Emily's desk. I could not understand what Miss Brown and the principal said. At first, all my classmates were just quiet. They gradually began to comprehend the situation, and some of them began to cry. While everyone was crying, I couldn't cry since I couldn't understand anything and was in a panic. Then came the day of the funeral. When I saw Emily in her coffin, my eyes eventually welled up with tears. I looked at the picture of her displayed. She was smiling so beautifully in that picture. When I saw her smiling face, I remembered what she had said to me. "Come on, smile." I began to smile as I felt as if I had heard an oral hallucination. How did the other attendees see my smile in the aftermath of Emily's death? Some may have thought I was insane. Even so, I kept smiling as hard as Emily in the photo as I gazed at it. And I conveyed my final message from my heart in front of her casket. "What did you think of me? I liked you. I was too timid to tell you. I wanted to stay close to you. I didn't want to ruin our relationship. I couldn't tell you because I didn't want to lose you. Now, I wanted to tell you, but you went somewhere I couldn't follow. I wish I had told you. I wish I had had more time to talk to you. I'm really grateful to you. I might not be here now if you hadn't said those words. Your words made me reconsider doing something crazy. Your words gave me hope. Your words gave me a new perspective of life. So I will live honorably on your behalf. Thank you very much." I left Emily with this thought in my heart. Several years passed after Emily's death, and we had a class reunion. At that time, a girl from my class approached me. "Come to think of it, did you like someone in high school?" "What? Why are you suddenly asking me that?" "Well, it's an old story, so I'll tell you. But Emily, who died, liked you." I was speechless when I heard those words. Was I the person Emily loved? I couldn't believe it, but the person who was speaking to me now was Emily's best friend, so I had to believe her. My eyes were welling up with tears when I realized. I cried for the first time since that day. I cried out loud, and then I laughed. I must spend my life with a smile on my face, with her words in my heart that saved me when I was bullied.
"You think you're a hero or something?" Anthony emerged from the shadows and smirked down at us as we panicked. Naomi, who was terrified of being surrounded by 5 gang members beside me, was trembling in fear. Miles Miller, a young gang leader, led the groups that surrounded Naomi and me. Miles was shouting and daring us to do something. But as soon as he heard my name, he altered his attitude and apologized sincerely. Anthony, taken aback by Miles' unexpected reaction, raised his voice and attempted to provoke them into attacking us. But Miles, irritated by Anthony, turned away from us and stared at Anthony, who was acting arrogantly at the back. Anthony, who was unaware of my relationship with Miles, apparently intended to harass me using Miles' gang authority. And because of this, Anthony, who had done something undeserving, found himself in a difficult situation. My name is Elias Lopez. I'm 36 years old this year, and I have a slightly different background than most people. When I was a student, I was convinced that no one around me was on my side, so I had to fight with others daily. I was occasionally taunted because of my little stature, yet I was the strongest of everyone. Of course, I was arrested by the police on occasion. Only Caleb Johnson, a police officer, worried about me from the bottom of his heart. "You're going to be a grown-up, so be nice to everyone." Caleb was always concerned about me, who was treated as an obstacle, and he gently corrected me whenever I got into trouble. I was worried about my future, but it was Caleb who showed me the path of joining the army. After enlisting, I felt confident in my physical ability, and my superiors noticed me and provided me with specialized training and experiences. During that time, I re-evaluated my life and focused on improving my studies and helping others. After a few years, I was promoted to a position where I was in charge of a unit, and I was assigned to the Special Forces. After that, as I completed numerous missions, I longed for a normal life, so I left the Special Forces and went to work for a normal company. The company I ended up working for was a small foreign-affiliated trading company. We engaged directly with other countries, of course, but we mostly served as a mediator between businesses. Sometimes our company had to deal with shady people. That's why Mr. Jones, the CEO, who knew about my background, hired me as a bodyguard as well. I've always had a weakness for formal things, so a job that required me to wear a suit every day and operate on a computer wasn't for me. However, I felt that even this was typical and that my days were productive. I had no complaints about my job, but there was only one thing I didn't like. It was the section chief, Anthony Hall, who was younger and taller than me. He was always arrogant because he graduated from a prominent college. Anthony's attitude of mocking me for being a high school graduate and a bottom feeder was quite annoying. "You didn't go to college, right? How did you get into this company? And you must have led a pretty shitty and futile life to finally get a job at your age, right?" It's true that I only graduated from high school. However, having served in the Army and then in the Special Forces, I am proud to say that I have lived a rich life that I could not have experienced anywhere else. After all, it was extremely hard to listen to Anthony's tedious boasts about his college days indefinitely. "If you didn't go to college, you're definitely missing out on life. Well, I suppose it is difficult for someone like you, who has only seen the bottom of the barrel, to imagine it." I couldn't believe that such a feeble man was a section chief who organized his subordinates. When I became upset with Anthony's attitude and pretentious mannerisms, my immediate supervisor, Naomi Johnson, the department leader, would always laugh it off. "There's no point in worrying about it. We merely need to focus on our job." I believe I felt nostalgic warmth from Naomi, who never looked down on anyone. To my surprise, she was the daughter of my mentor, Caleb Johnson. While we were chatting happily about Caleb, Anthony pounded my desk with an irritated expression. "You look like you're having a good time, Mr. High School graduate. You don't deserve to chat with Naomi." Exasperated, Anthony pushed the mountain of work onto me and went away. Then, right beside me, Naomi looked at me worriedly. "Can you handle them?" Yes, it was a lot, but compared to the operations of the Special Forces, this was light stuff. Even at my employment, filling paperwork was nothing to worry about. However, after more than 10 years in the world of the Special Forces, I lacked the manners and rules of a working member of society. Without Naomi's help, I couldn't even schedule rounding appointments. Naomi was my senior, but much younger than me in age. The way she gently reprimanded me, who was sometimes untrustworthy, caused me to feel nostalgic and convinced me that they were father and daughter after all. And every time Naomi accompanied me on my rounds, Anthony gritted his teeth and glared at me enviously. Anyone could see by his attitude that Anthony was after Naomi. Indeed, Naomi, who was beautiful and had a cheerful personality, was well received by the employees and was a very attractive woman. Though Naomi, who didn't like it, kept her distance as if to run away from Anthony, He didn't give a damn and approached her whenever he had a chance. "I found a nice restaurant, Naomi. Why don't we go out tonight?" Anthony attempted to touch Naomi, who was upset, and I couldn't resist and grabbed his hand. "Ouch! What are you doing?" Can't you see Naomi is resisting? And these days, touching a woman's body can issue a problem. "Do you know who you're talking to? Unlike a bottom feeder like you, I'm a section chief." Just because he was a section chief, Anthony was arrogant and overbearing. Regardless of my position, my mentor's daughter, Naomi, was in trouble, and there was no way I was not going to help her. Anthony made a motion to shoo my hand and punch my stomach with a tightly grasped palm. Anthony's attack did not cause any damage to my well-trained body. I gave him a pained look, and he snickered at me with a look of triumph on his face. "Well, that's enough for today. Don't ever get in the way of me and Naomi." He was in a good mood at the time and went away. But to protect Naomi, I kept interrupting Anthony's antics over and over. Then one day, I suddenly got a call from the head of the department. Apparently, Anthony had told him something random. I was not satisfied with being yelled at by the director, but I kept apologizing to him. Unlike Naomi, who rushed to console me after being released from the lecture, Anthony came to ridicule me. "You're just a burden to the company. Get the hell out of here." If I had caused problems here, I would have caused trouble to Naomi and Mr. Jones, who hired me. I had to pass on Anthony's abuse, holding back the urge to talk back. But I kept intervening to keep him away from Naomi. As I continued to do so, the work Anthony imposed on me piled up on my desk day after day. The amount of work continued to increase with each passing day. Finally, I had to do so much work that I couldn't make it to the office on time, or even to the last train on time. "I'm transforming you from a useless guy into a valuable employee. You should thank me." Naomi, who was worried about me, helped me out, but before I knew it, it was past midnight. She looked at her watch and suddenly smiled at me. "It's already late. Let's go somewhere for dinner and then take a cab home." I couldn't refuse her invitation or let her go home alone. "Yeah, you're right. I'll buy you a drink since you helped me with my work." I found Naomi's childlike expression of innocent joy slightly different from her usual beautiful appearance, very attractive. The fun time passed in the blink of an eye. I left Naomi in front of the restaurant and went out to the main street to look for a cab. Just as the cab stopped, I heard Naomi's screams. I hurried back and found her surrounded by 5 large guys. "Hey, what are you guys doing?" "I'll take care of him later. Lady, will you come with us?" As I brushed off the arm holding Naomi, the man looked at me with a nasty expression on his face. "Hey, who the hell do you think you are? Don't you know who I am? I'm Miles, a member of the gang that runs this area." The man who called himself Miles belonged to the gang group that Mr. Jones had told me to watch out for. And Miles was the leader of that clan. With his large stature and sharp eyes, he had an atmosphere that would frighten an ordinary person into running away at once. But whoever the opponent was, I couldn't back down. "I don't care who you are. If you touch her, I will show no mercy." As I dared with a dignified attitude, Miles' fists flew at me in frustration. I assumed an attack of this scale would not damage me, but being hit so many times made it difficult. I took advantage of the moment, took Naomi's hand, and tried to escape. However, there were 5 guys. They did not let me escape so easily. As I was fighting off the attacks of Miles and the others, I heard a familiar voice coming from the shadows of the building. "What are you doing? Hurry up and finish that guy." Out of the shadows came Anthony. Anthony appeared in front of us, and while he was sitting on his haunches, he began to speak selfishly. You think you're a hero or something? How can you possibly be a match for Miles and his buddies? You stay away from Naomi. Anthony, convinced of his absolute superiority, looked down at me with a smirk on his face. There was nowhere to run against 5 people, and no matter how much I tried to protect Naomi, the odds were against me. Naomi, terrified, was shaking and unable to move. I racked my brains in this desperate situation, but I couldn't come up with anything, and I realized I fell for Anthony's scheme. However, upon closer inspection, I noticed that Miles' face was familiar to me. So I gave him my name. Could it be that you are that Miles Lee? I'm Miles Lee. What do you mean by that Miles Lee? Do you think you can get away with that arrogant attitude? Miles, annoyed by my words, frowned and glared at me from above. Do you recognize me? I'm Elias Lopez. Right after I said my name, Miles rolled his eyes and suddenly turned pale. Miles, who was panicked, then dropped on his knees and began apologizing, despite the fact that he was in the middle of the street. Wait a minute. Are you Elias? I had no idea. I'm terribly sorry. Hey guys, apologize to him quickly. Upset by Miles' words, the remaining 4 apologized to me as they were told. Naomi, taken aback by Miles' sudden strange behavior, was so surprised that her body had stopped trembling. And on top of Anthony's head, who appears dazed, were a bunch of question marks. Wait, Elias, who are you? Stunned by Miles' repeated apologies, Naomi looked back and forth at me and Miles' faces. Miles and the others were terrified in an incomprehensible way, and Anthony, who couldn't take it anymore, became enraged and began abusing them in a hoarse voice. What the hell are you doing, Miles? Hurry up and get rid of that bastard! You shut up! Do you have any idea who he is? Elias is the leader of the team that used to run this area, and I owe him a great debt of gratitude for all his help. He's not a man like you who can talk lightly. Before I met Caleb, I met Miles Lee when I was on a rampage to release my anger and frustration inside me. Miles approached me, who had never lost a fight up until that point, and asked me to let him join my team. At first, I was not interested, but I began to take care of Miles, who always followed me around. This strange relationship with Miles was the catalyst for something to change in me a little. I never expected to see him again in this way, though. Miles got up and apologized to me again and again. Anthony, bewildered by Miles' flip-flopping behavior, still ordered Miles and the others to attack me and Naomi. Who gives a shit about those old days? You said you'd do me a favor, so get on with it. Anthony agitated Miles and his men with wild words, but Miles, on the contrary, glared at Anthony, who kept talking. Anthony, who did not understand what Miles was saying or doing, was upset. He began scratching his head carelessly. His gaze was shifting. Suddenly, he stopped moving and pulled something out of the inside pocket of his jacket. Anthony grabbed the object, which reflected the light and looked sharp. Then, with a weird yell, he approached me to attack. Anthony tried to strike me with a blow, but I lightly dodged it. I grabbed his hand and rolled the dangerous object in his hand on the ground. Who the hell are you? Stay away from Naomi. Miles, someone shady like you should only work for me. Anthony, his face red with anger, cursed Miles and the others. But Miles and the others were unmoved by his words. I let go of his arms and he fell to the ground with a mighty thud. Anthony stood up, but he stared at me with a devilish look on his face. You know what's coming. You acted against your boss. Anthony looked around, angrily cursing me, Miles, and the others. And then, holding his arm painfully, he ran away from the scene. Naomi, who was watching the whole thing, looked at me curiously with her mouth wide open. I didn't want her to know, but in a situation like this, There was no way I could not explain. I took a deep breath and slowly told her my old story. To tell you the truth, in the past, I didn't live a life that I could be proud of. It was then that I met your dad. I told her the story of when I met Caleb. But Naomi had an optimistic look on her face, as if she had finally grasped everything. I was bewildered by her unexpected reaction, and Naomi started talking with a big smile on her face. "Oh, so it was you. I heard about you from my dad a long time ago. I'm pleased to see that you're as polite and straightforward as I expected." Apparently, Naomi had heard about me from Caleb. I was a little embarrassed to hear that Caleb was so happy to talk about me, despite all the trouble I had caused him. While me and Naomi were feeling awkward, Miles spoke to me apologetically.
"I'm really sorry about what happened today, Elias. Unlike back then, you have become a completely mature man. I admire you more than ever."
Miles' guys, perplexed by his reaction, were observing us from a distance. I was sure they were wary of me, who had become a mysterious figure to whom Miles apologized.
"Elias, to make up for what happened, I'll drive you home. Miss, please allow us to drive you home too."
I took advantage of Miles' kindness and got into the car he led me to. Naomi smiled at me with a grin in her eye as I relaxed, believing that the situation had been resolved. "I don't know all the details about you, Elias, but you must have been in an amazing place. Do you train yourself hard too?" Even after I retired from the military, I haven't missed my daily training routine. I still have a superhuman body with a body fat percentage of 5%, which I trained for not only during my time in the Special Forces, but also now. Naomi was so pleased to talk about my muscles that the anxiety she felt when we were attacked just a few minutes before had vanished. We got off track, but I was relieved to see Naomi's joy returning. First, we took Naomi home, and Miles drove me home too. On the way home, Miles got out of the car and called out to me.
"Elias, if there's anything I can do for you, please feel free to contact me. By the way, that guy, Anthony, seems to have a serious grudge against you."
At that time, what I heard from Miles about Anthony was beyond belief. However, I now had proof that Anthony could no longer be considered a section chief. The next day, I arrived at work to find a grumpy, irritated-looking Anthony waiting for me. Immediately after we met, Anthony grabbed my suit and literally glared at me from above. He started bragging about his past, as if to tell me to be afraid of him.
"That thing yesterday was some kind of mistake, right? I was in a gang team in high school. There's no way I'm scared of you."
Anthony appeared to have met Miles at college through one of his seniors. But the way Anthony addressed him suggested they were not on equal footing. If anything, Miles used him as an errand boy. Even so, Anthony, who was proud of the fact that Miles had his back, looked down on me with a smile on his face. Disgusted by Anthony's attitude, I lightly removed my arm from his grip and made a phone call with my phone on speaker. "Miles, you got a minute?"
"Sure, no problem, and I'm so happy to hear from you, Elias."
Anthony, who had been astonished by Miles' humble style of speaking the previous day, was frozen in place, astonished. He must have never imagined I'd call Miles. With Anthony stunned, I continued. "That story you told me yesterday, it's true, isn't it?"
"Yes, sir. A man named Anthony paid us to attack you and the woman. We are quite unhappy by Anthony's selfishness, since he claims to have gang backup and does whatever he wants."
Anthony, flustered by Miles' comment, tried to hang up the phone quickly, but several employees had already arrived at the office. They were looking down on him coldly.
"That's a lie! I have no idea what he's talking about. I'm sure Elias is forcing him to say that."
After that, as Miles continued to talk about his exchange with Anthony, Anthony's face turned pale and he fell to his knees, covering his ears and cowering in a small ball. Miles, enraged at Anthony for labeling him a liar, cursed at him on the other end of the phone. Then Mr. Jones, who had heard the commotion, appeared. When he heard about Anthony's misdeeds from an employee nearby, Mr. Jones sighed loudly and looked at Anthony with disdain.
Anthony, is it true? No, this is, well...
Mr. Jones asked Anthony, who was mumbling. Anthony, who had given up the plan, got on his knees and apologized with a pallid face. Mr. Jones looked astonished, calling out to Anthony, who apologized in an unspoken voice.
I think you're apologizing to the wrong person. I understand. Elias, I'm so sorry.
Still not convinced about apologizing to me, Anthony apologized, frustrated. Not only did Anthony's plan fail, but Mr. Jones directly dismissed him from his position as section manager on the spot. Mr. Jones didn't stop there. Surprisingly, Anthony was demoted all the way down to a rank-and-file employee. Days have passed since the incident. Anthony suddenly understood that he was acting out of character, and he stopped being impulsive and bossy to his junior colleagues. But for some reason, every time my stare met Anthony's, he quickly backed away and fled. It was rare for Anthony to talk to me, but one day he was scared. But he spoke to me with a grin on his face just like before.
Elias, you didn't go to college, right? But can you speak Spanish?
It appears that Anthony received a call from a client for whom I am responsible, but the person only spoke Spanish. Anthony must have thought that because I was a high school graduate, I didn't respond or conduct business negotiations in Spanish. However, thanks to my hard study before I was assigned to the Special Forces, I could speak Spanish with ease, so there was no problem. After successfully completing the discussion with the other party without incident, Anthony rolled his eyes with an empty expression on his face, while other employees regarded me with respect. I was a member of the Special Forces, so it was no big deal for me to speak Spanish. But they didn't seem to think so and were completely surprised. Wait a minute, isn't this normal? Did I do something wrong again? I've spent a lot of time abroad, so I thought it was only natural for me to be able to do this. Apparently, Anthony, who was often bragging about his educational history and acted so proud of himself, was labeled an inept college graduate by the staff, since his Spanish abilities were inadequate. Indeed, Anthony's Spanish on the phone was so halting that it wasn't much of a conversation at all. He only realized that that person wanted me to take over the phone. At the same time, people's perceptions of me shifted dramatically. People were disappointed with Anthony, who had been called inept, despite being a former section manager and college graduate. The staff who had previously looked down on Anthony were now giggling at him, who had completely lost his dignity. Anthony returned to his desk embarrassed and held his head. From then on, most of the cases that required Spanish language support would be passed on to me. Sometimes, Anthony acted bossy with his junior staff when I wasn't around. However, no one would take orders from a pretentious former section leader who knew no Spanish, and none of them would follow Anthony's instructions. One day, when I returned from an outing, I came across a scene where Anthony was approaching a new female employee.
This is not how it looks. She was the one who approached me. This is not my fault.
Anthony was making up excuses to make up for the situation, but they all sounded like the whining of a child. I didn't think it was worth listening to, so I discreetly told Anthony something. I'm still in touch with Miles. That's why we haven't had any trouble with that group lately. I always have Miles and his people watching over you. Anthony sat down on the spot as if all his strength had been drained out of him, looking into the distance and trembling a little. After that, Anthony's arrogance subsided. And sometimes, I saw him praising other people. He must have changed his mind and reformed his behavior. However, he continues to stare at me in the same way to determine if I'm in a good mood or not. He frowns and breaks into a cold sweat whenever we meet eyes. A few years have passed since I started working at my current company. Naomi got married and left the company, and I was promoted to section manager. Anthony is now working as a section chief. Anthony has altered his perception and is now more considerate of people around him, making him a reliable employee. After meeting Caleb, I have come to believe that the world would be a better place if more people realize their mistakes, like Anthony did. I have seen a lot of dirty parts of human beings since I was in the Special Forces. I still have a small dream that there will be no more conflicts among human beings. You may think I am childish at my age. Caleb and Naomi, however, took my fantasy seriously. I've kept in touch with the Johnsons as if we were close friends. There isn't much I can do, but if I can affect people's perceptions of others, even somewhat, I'll utilize my experience to my advantage.